Well, tonight we're looking at Hebrews chapter 1, verses 4 through 14. We will finish chapter 1. A quick review. Last week we talked about Jesus is better than the prophets, and that was in chapter 1, verses 1, 2, and 3. And the writer points out that in former times, God spoke through the prophets. And he did that in many ways to many different people and used a lot of different prophets to communicate his message. But in these last days, God has spoken to us through his Son. And so the Son is greater than the prophets. And we looked at that last week. The prophets are servants, but Jesus is the Son. He has a higher position. There were many prophets, but there's only one Son of God. The message of the prophets, multiple messages, very diverse, but the message of Jesus is very singular, and it's also final. It's God's final message to mankind. There will not be another message beyond Jesus. God is going to wrap up history through his Son. And so we need to pay attention to that message. The writer goes on to list 7 facts about Jesus. And the number 7 in Jewish thinking is a number of completion. And so these 7 facts kind of give a complete picture of who Jesus is. And just as a reminder, God appointed the Son to be the heir of all things. Jesus will inherit the world one day. Number 2, God made the universe through the Son. The Son is the creator along with the Father. Number 3, the Son is the radiance of God's glory. If you want to know what God looks like, just look at Jesus. He radiates God's glory. And number 4, he's the exact representation of God's being. God's character gets expressed through Jesus. Number 5, the Son sustains all things by his powerful word. So we find out that Jesus created the world. He keeps it running and moves it towards its ultimate goal. And one day he's going to return and reclaim planet Earth as his. It belongs to him. And it belongs to him because he is the creator. It also belongs to him because he is the Savior. And so number 6 is that Jesus provided purification for our sins. The Old Testament priest had to offer a sacrifice for themselves and for the people every single day. And every single year, it was the Day of Atonement all over again. Jesus offered himself once, and that's all that was necessary. He did it once and for all time. And then number 7, the Son sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. Being at someone's right hand was the most glorified, authoritative place, and Jesus has sat down because his work is done at God's right hand, the place of honor and authority. And God spoke through the prophets, but no prophet did what Jesus did. No prophet created the world. No prophet offered his life for the sins of the people. And there's not a prophet seated at God's right hand. Jesus is seated at God's right hand. Jesus is greater than the prophets. Today we begin the second section, that Jesus is better than the angels. And this will take us from chapter 1, verse 4, all the way through chapter 2, verse 18. In the Old Testament, God spoke through the prophets. He also spoke through angels. Often God would deliver a message by sending an angel to someone. And many believed because the angels were supernatural beings, that they were the next highest in power right after God. You know, there's God, and then there's the supernatural angels, especially the archangels, right underneath God in terms of authority. But the writer of Hebrews is going to prove that Jesus is superior to the angels. He is the Son, and because he is the Son, he has a higher position than any angel. Now, as modern readers were thinking, Jesus is greater than the angels. Okay, I knew that. I just kind of, learned that in Sunday school. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that the original readers held the angels in very high esteem. And many of them felt that Jesus and the angels were pretty much equal with one another. Many of them believed that angels were the intermediaries between God and people. If God had a message for people, He sent an angel. And when we pray, it's the angels who take those prayers and deliver them into the presence of God. So in the ancient world, angels had a much higher position than what we tend to give them today. Also, the giving of the law to Moses. We know that Moses went up on top of the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights and hung out with God during that whole time, and he returns with the law. Well, according to Jewish thought, God gave the law first to the angels, and then the angels gave the law to Moses. The idea was Moses could not be face-to-face with God for 40 days and live. So in order to solve that problem, God gave the law to the angels, and the angels then gave it to Moses. So even in the New Testament, we find many Christians with an unhealthy preoccupation with angels. In fact, Colossians talks about angel worship. So they were not only worshiping God and worshiping Jesus, they were worshiping angels as well. So in order to prove that Jesus is superior to all things, the author has to spend some time talking about the fact that Jesus is indeed superior or better than the angels. Well, tonight we're going to look at the greater glory of the Son. And that's going to be in chapter 1, verses 4 through 14. And before we get into that verse by verse, let me just read that entire paragraph. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 4 through 14. Beginning in verse 4, "So he became as much superior to the angels, as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. For to which of the angels did God ever say, 'You are my son, today I have become your father'? Or again, 'I will be his father, and he will be my son'? And again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, 'Let all God's angels worship him.' In speaking of the angels, he says, 'He makes his angels winds, his servants flames of fire.' But about the Son, he says, 'Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever, and righteousness will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy.' He also says, 'In the beginning, O Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. You will roll them up like a robe. Like a garment they will be changed. But you remain the same, and your years will never end.' To which of the angels did God ever say, 'Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet'? Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation?" So in those verses 4 through 14, the author is going to prove that Jesus is superior to the angels. And he begins in verse 4 by talking about the fact that he is superior because the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. What name does Jesus have that the angels do not have? It's the name Son. Jesus is the Son. In a typical Jewish family, the highest authority in the family is the father. Next in line is the firstborn son. Further down on the totem pole are the servants. So in using that analogy, the writer of Hebrews is going to say that Jesus is the Son and angels are the servants. Jesus has a much superior name to theirs. He also talks about the fact that Jesus inherited that name. He is God the Son, so he's the rightful Son of God. He wasn't given that title. It was his all along. He had the absolute right to that title. So to wrap up this whole thing in a nutshell, very simple. Jesus is the Son. The angels are servants. Obviously, Jesus must be superior because a son is always superior to a servant. Now he's going to prove that. And in order to prove that, in verses 5 through 13, he's going to quote 7 Old Testament passages. Now in verses 1 through 3, he gave us 7 characteristics of Jesus. Now he's going to quote 7 Old Testament passages. And again, the number 7's the number of completion, so the writer of Hebrews seems to like the number 7. Of those 7 passages in the Old Testament, 5 of them will come from the Psalms, 1 from 2 Samuel, and 1 from Deuteronomy. And it all begins in verse 5. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have become your father"? That is a quotation of Psalm chapter 2, verse 7. Psalm 2 is about the coronation of a king, a son of David, somebody who would sit on the throne that David had, which at one time had occupied. So a new king is coming to the throne. And there's this elaborate ceremony that takes place until finally the king takes his place on the throne of David. And when the king sits down, God says to the new king, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." There was a sense in which the king of Israel, the king who sat on David's throne, was a son of God. Now, the government of the nation of Israel back in the Old Testament was intended to be a theocracy, meaning God was the king. If you ask the people of Israel, "Who's your king?" they should respond by saying, "God is our king." But at one point, the people of Israel said to Samuel, "We want a human king, so find us a king." And God eventually said, "Okay." So it's not only a theocracy, it's also a monarchy. And once David sat on the throne of Israel, God promised that a descendant of yours will always sit upon the throne. So, once the king is seated on the throne, he has this relationship with God, one of father and son, because the king is to represent God to the people. Ultimately, God is the king, but the human king is to represent God and to lead the people in the worship of God. So if things go well, God remains the king. The human king is his son, so to speak, leading the people towards God. He's leading for God. Now, if you happen to read 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, and 2 Chronicles, you'll quickly discover that most of the kings did a really lousy job of doing that. In fact, the kings, for the most part, led the people not in the worship of God, but in the worship of idols. There are more bad kings, evil kings, in the Old Testament than there were good kings. But ultimately, that was how it was supposed to work. God is God. The king is considered a son of God, representing God and ruling over the nation for God. That's how it was supposed to work. So the king is considered a son of God. Jewish rabbis also looked at this verse and said this must be a reference also to the Messiah, the ultimate king who would come one day and rule over the entire world for God. And so, in many ways, then the Messiah would also be called by God his Son. Now, looking at what we've discovered so far, let me back up a couple of steps and talk about how Jewish people interpret the Old Testament. What they often do is they take the words of the Old Testament and they mean one thing in a particular context. But you can take those same words, move it into a new context, and it has a brand new meaning. The words are the same, but the meaning in the new context is different. So in Psalm 2, verse 7, the words, "You are my son, today I have become your father," refers to the coronation of the king, the day that the king sits on the throne and is given the responsibility to be a son of God and to represent God for the people. But when the writer of Hebrews quotes them in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 5, all of a sudden they have a brand new meaning. Because now that we know who the Messiah is, it's, "You are my son, today I have become your father." It is God the Father speaking to God the Son and saying, "You are my son, today I have become your father." So it's the idea that now Jesus is sitting on the throne of David. And he is now recognized as Messiah and King. And God the Father says to him, "You are my son." And obviously, Jesus is the Son of God in a very different sense than which the King of Israel would be the Son of God. It's now God the Father and God the Son. And this says something, I think, very important about the inspiration of Scripture. God inspired the Old Testament, and people wrote down the words as the Holy Spirit led them. And God knew all along who the Messiah would be. God knew that the Messiah one day would be God the Son. And so he has the psalmist write those words, "You are my son." And indeed, Jesus is the Son. "And today I have become your father." What does it mean by today? Well, obviously, Jesus has always been God the Son. Jesus has always existed. Jesus at no time was born. He always existed. So he was always the Son of God. But there were certain times when it was proclaimed that Jesus is the Son of God. And there are 5 times in the New Testament when the word goes out that Jesus will be is the Son of God. The word was given to Mary, his mother, that the Son that you're going to give birth to will be called the Son of the Most High. And that's Luke chapter 1, verse 32. So Mary is told, "Your baby is the Son of the Most High God." He's the Messiah. He's the King. He's God the Son. Second, at Jesus' baptism, there's a voice from heaven in Mark chapter 1, verse 11, that says, "You are my Son." That was the words from heaven, from God the Father. And everyone listening to those words, if they knew Psalm 2:7, it's the exact phrase, "You are my Son." They should have known immediately, this is the Messiah. This is the Son of David, who's also the Son of God, who's going to be our Messiah, because he's the fulfillment of those words from Psalm 2:7. At Jesus' transfiguration on the mountain, a voice from the cloud says, "This is my Son." Paul declares in Romans chapter 1, verse 4, that through his resurrection, Jesus is now proclaimed the Son of God. And we've already seen in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, that Jesus has sat down on the right hand of the Father on high. Jesus is the Son of God. So this verse very clearly states, "You are my Son. I have become your Father." Jesus is the Messiah. He's the Son of David. He's also the Son of God in a very unique way. It has never been declared that a specific angel would be the Son of God. Now, there are places in the Old Testament where the angels as a whole are collectively called the sons of God. But no specific angel is ever given the title, the Son of God. But Jesus receives the title, Son of God. He is superior to the angels. There's a second quote, "I will be his father, and he will be my son." This particular quote comes from 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 14. The context is David wants to build a temple for God. David looks around and says, "I have a palace, everybody else has a home, and God, you have a tent. That's not good. Let me build you a palace." And the prophet Nathan comes back to David and says, well, basically, God doesn't need a palace. But if you're going to build God a palace, it's not going to be you who does the building. David, you're a man of war. It will be your son and your successor who will build the palace. And that palace was also a temple, and King Solomon built the temple. And the temple that he built turned out to be one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And speaking to David, God says about his son, about his successor, Solomon, "I will be his father, and he will be my son." He will be the king, and just like David, I've been a father to you, and you've been my son. To your successor, I will be like a father, and he will be my son. And from that moment on, the king of Israel was always referred to as a son of God. There was to be a father-son relationship between the king of Israel and God the Father. Looking at this in the New Testament, Jesus comes on the scene, and Jesus starts talking about God. And how does Jesus refer to God? What word does he use to talk about God? He calls him Father. I will be his Father. And when God speaks about Jesus, what does God call Jesus? The Son. So that father-son relationship ultimately fulfilled between God the Father and God the Son. And again, no angel is ever given that kind of status. Moving on to the next verse. Again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." That particular quote's a little bit difficult. It sounds a little bit like Psalm 97, verse 7. It also sounds a lot like the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint and its rendition of Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 43. Now, the Old Testament that we have in our Bible is based upon the Hebrew text. It's not based upon the Greek text. So our Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 43 sounds a little bit different than the one that the author used. In the footnotes of my Bible, there is that reference that says, "Let all God's angels worship him." It's not in the text, it's in a footnote, because it's only in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, not in the Hebrew translation of the Old Testament. But the message itself is very clear. All the angels were to worship God. God created the angels and they were to all worship Him. The thing about this quote is, the writer of Hebrews uses this quote to refer to Jesus, not just God the Father. So let all of God's angels worship Him, the Son, God the Son. So if the angels are worshiping Jesus, then Jesus is far superior to the angels. The one doing the worship is inferior to the one being worshiped. Now, there's an interesting story about the firstborn. When God brings His firstborn into the world, in Jewish thinking, that was Adam. That's, God created Adam as the height of His creation, and all the angels were to worship Adam. Now, there's a story found in rabbinic tradition, not in the Bible, that God told all the angels to worship Adam, and Satan refused. And Michael the archangel ended up worshiping Adam and leading the rest of the angels to worship Adam. So, it could be that in the back of his mind, the writer of Hebrews is thinking about that story. He could also be thinking about the fact that God's firstborn, and again, the firstborn is that position of honor. In a Jewish family, to be the firstborn, you are in a position of honor. And the firstborn that God brought into the world, you could argue, was His Son. That God sent Jesus, the Son of God, into the world and said to the angels, worship Him. And when we look at the Christmas story, the angels appear to the shepherds and say, I bring you good news of great joy. And He talks about the birth of Messiah, the one that they were to worship. But the basic idea is the angels are worshiping the Son. Therefore, the Son is superior to the angels. In verse 7, he's now going to talk about the angels. Like, who are they and what is their responsibility? So in speaking of the angels, he says He makes His angels winds, His servants flames of fire. Here the angels are called servants. They're not the Son of God. They're the servants of God. They do God's bidding. They execute God's orders. God speaks and the angels carry out the orders. And they do it with the swiftness of the wind and with the power of fire. They do it very quickly, very obediently, and very powerfully. If God says do something, it's instantly done by the angels. They are His servants. And again, the angels are servants, but Jesus is the Son. Now, there's a big contrast between verses 7 and 8. In speaking of the angels, he says, and then in verse 8, but about the Son, he says. So in other words, God said one thing about the angels, they're servants. God said something far greater about the Son. And what does He say about the Son? Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. This particular quote comes from Psalm 45, and it's the story of a royal wedding. It's the king who's getting married. The king is the bridegroom. And in addressing the bridegroom, God says to the bridegroom, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. Now, God had already told David that his throne would last forever and ever, and that a descendant of his would always sit on the throne. But at no point did God ever refer to David as God. At no point did God ever refer to a king of Israel as God. The Son of God, yes, but never as God. But here we have this verse in Psalm 45 where God says to the Messiah, the King, who's going to sit on David's throne. Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. God knew when whoever wrote Psalm 45 was writing the words that this would be a reference to God the Son. So God the Father refers to God the Son as God. God never refers to an angel as God, but to his own Son, he is God. As we move on, this kingdom would be about righteousness, and it would last forever. And the kingdom of Jesus is about righteousness. He will come and establish a righteous kingdom that will last forever. And the prophets again and again. So everybody knew when they read that verse, okay, he's talking about the Messiah. He's talking about the ultimate king that will sit on David's throne. And he will reign forever, and he will reign in righteousness. And we know from the New Testament, he was talking about Jesus, who would be that king. Moving on to the next one in verse 10, this is a quote from Psalm 102. He also says, "In the beginning, O Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth." Again, this is a praise for God as creator. But the writer of Hebrews is applying this not to God the Father, but to God the Son. So Psalm 45, God calls God God, and calls Jesus God. Here in Psalm 102, God refers to Jesus as Lord. So he is the Lord, and he is the creator of the earth. And we've already seen back in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, that Jesus is the creator. He's the creator of the earth. He's addressed as Lord, and he goes on to talk about the fact that creation will perish, but you, God, remain. And he goes on in verse 12 to say, you remain the same, and your years will never end. It's an everlasting kingdom. This earth will perish. There will be a new heaven and a new earth. But God the Son remains the same. He created the world, but it will be recreated. A new heaven, a new earth. But he remains the same. So, God is the creator. Jesus is the creator. Angels are created. The creator is greater than what he creates. So Jesus is superior to the angels because he created them. And then the last verse. To which of the angels did God ever say, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet"? This is another reference to Psalm 110, verse 1. This was already referenced in verse 3, where Jesus takes a seat at the right hand of the Majesty on high, where Jesus is the King. The emphasis here is the fact that the King is now enthroned. The King has taken his rightful position on the throne. He is seated at God's right hand. Jesus is seated in the position of highest honor. There's no angel that's seated at God's right hand. It's Jesus who is seated there. And then we move to verse 14. Wrapping up by saying, who are these angels anyway? I mean, what is their role? Okay, we know what the Son's going to do, but what are the angels supposed to do? And he says, are not all angels ministering spirits? They are spirits who do God's work. They do a very important work, a glorious work, a very significant work. But they are ministering spirits. They're not the ones who will rule. They're not the ones who will establish the kingdom. They are the ones who will do God's work. They're ministering spirits. They're servants of God. And they serve those who will inherit salvation. Who do they serve? They serve the people of God. God sends them to minister to us. It's their responsibility to minister to those who will inherit salvation. This salvation that he's talking about is the salvation that will happen when Jesus returns. Now, today we get a glimpse of that. Today we have a down payment on that. But ultimately, our ultimate salvation will take place when Jesus returns. And the writer of Hebrews is going to say, we dare not neglect this great salvation. That will be his message in chapter 2. So, we've looked at 7 verses of Scripture from the Old Testament. And it's interesting that most of them were given a brand new meaning because of Jesus. Yes, the king, the earthly king, who sits upon David's throne is a son of God in a sense, a metaphorical sense. But Jesus is literally the Son of God. He is God the Son. And it's amazing that all of those references about Messiah all come down to a relationship between Father and Son. It's a relationship between God the Father and God the Son. Jesus is the Son of God. He is God. He is the Lord. He is the Creator. He is, therefore, much superior to the angels. The glory of the angels does not even come close to comparing with the glory of the Son. He is the Son of God. He is positioned at the very highest place. Because he's God, the Son, no one is higher than he is. No prophet and no angel. And the writer's going to go on to say, if the message delivered by the prophets was significant and important, a message that you better listen to, how much more should we listen to the message that comes from the Son? If the Son is greater than the prophets and the angels, then the message that the Son delivers is even greater than the message of the prophets and the angels. So we need to pay attention to that message. Jesus is the Son. He is God. Amazing story, isn't it? That God all along promised to send the Messiah. And all the prophets wrote about what Messiah would do and how he would sit upon David's throne and establish an everlasting kingdom. But even though the prophets wrote the words, recorded the message, they had no clue that the Messiah would turn out to be God in the flesh. We know that to be true because we have the New Testament and he's been here. What an incredible story that God put together. And we have the opportunity to read that story and also go back and look at those prophecies and go, wow, look at how that's worded. It's worded in such a way that Jesus fulfills it absolutely. Incredible. The Word of God, the words themselves, have incredible meaning. And Jesus fulfilled them all. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you that Jesus came to be the Messiah, that he fulfilled the prophecies, that he truly is the Son of God. And Father, thank you for an opportunity to know him, to believe in him, to have his Spirit living inside of us. Father, thank you for the message of Scripture that Messiah has truly come, and his name is Jesus, and he fulfills everything that the prophets say that he would. Father, thank you for the message of Jesus, and oh, what a message it is. It is a message of hope, but it's a message we have to pay attention to because it's your final message to mankind. So, Father, give us the courage to spread that message, to share that message, because the entire world needs to hear about what God the Son has done for them. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.